We have Chase Claypool, DK Metcalf, Dak Prescott on the injury season-long list. And we've also got enough data points. Still a game going on as we're recording this live. But 5 weeks in, that means contender, pretender, rebuilder. Where do you stand? We're about halfway to Dynasty trade deadlines, which means we need to also assess our situations in addition to the changing player value landscape. Welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons, joined by Jordan McNamara. And Jordan, here we are. And I'll tell you, I've got a very few teams that are 1-4, 0-5. A lot of them were known rebuilding scenarios or known orphans going into this year. But the teams that are, in that state, I think you got to be pretty aggressive. And then the teams where you're 4-1, 5-0, maybe a really good 3-2 team, you're feeling pretty good about things. Assess where you are. Do I need to supplement? This is where, 3-4 weeks, maybe not so much. 5-6 weeks, you kind of need to pick where you're going. And 3 or 4 teams might be in the middle, but a lot of teams, you're one way or the other, and the market is still pretty fresh in terms of changing contending assets for rebuilding assets and vice versa.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about this before the show. I think this is a really interesting time too, because we have injuries that are happening some of them are racking up, right? And we are going to see interesting spots like guys that have Mike Davis be firmly in contending windows and are probably going to lose him here, right? In the next couple of weeks or so when McCaffrey comes back. Same thing with Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott might be the person that has Dak Prescott rostered might be 5-0, right? And so it's going to be an interesting calculus. I think that there is some temptation this year that I think it's enough of a market for people to sell into to contenders that if you're on the fence about whether or not you can make the playoffs this year, that this might be the year to say, let me break the bank early on being a seller. And because there's so many, there's so many of these opportunities that I think can be really profitable, where you get guys like that have long-term value. And you think of guys like Nick Chubb, and some of the rookies too that haven't hit yet, right? These are plenty of accessible guys that could be on contending teams that are really good buy candidates. I think it's a really interesting year for that. I'm not saying tank, but I'm saying if you're not close, if you are close, but it's close to, your 2 and 3 bottom half of the league, you really need to be critical. I think this is a year that it could be pretty lucrative to potentially trade for future assets and be able to cash in for some depressed asset guys.
Yeah. And the thing I'm noticing is you really need to be aware, especially in how you're doing those types of trades, because it's an environment where, depending on how your league is constructed for what your draft order is it based on record and points? Is it based on potential points? There are different ways to construct trades, because what I notice is, first of all, you're acquiring players for the future. Future for that prism is next year plus. And this year is relatively meaningless, but that doesn't mean anybody that's on a timetable for the next 2 to 3 months is someone you need to drop or trade right now, because those ancillary running backs, those injury away types, those are the types that if you get the roll of the dice injury next week, then all of a sudden that is a highly liquid asset to trade. That might be someone that, what if you're 1-4 and that injury comes home a la Mike Davis, and all of a sudden you got a startable guy for the next 4 to 6 weeks or something, and you ended up winning this week. You're 2-4. Now you've got a found starter. So there are ways to do that. But I will say one thing about potential points. I've already started learning that a lot of those ancillary wide receivers, especially ones that aren't really tradable types, you're getting these streaming types, and they really hurt your potential points sometimes, because they can pop up for a big game, Travis Fulgham looking directly at you, but yet how much are they really tradable? Because the likelihood they go back to a pumpkin is really, really high in the next few weeks. And I don't know if anyone's going to pony up to pay a second, and maybe in some savvy leagues, maybe even a third for that. Whereas a running back, it's like injury, boom, he's in there. And it's like then you have a lot more liquidity with that player, even if it's someone that doesn't have a lot of beyond this year, beyond the next month potential.
Yeah, it's the essentially the opposite effect of AWARP, right? Which is with AWARP, we're trying to, which is adjusted wins over replacement player. We're talking about really trying to capture all those usable points, right? In a situation like Mike Davis, Alexander Madison, and this in week 6 will be one of those situations where he should be in. I'm not going to say universally in lineups, but he should be a top 15 play, right? You're capturing.
Being so
those.
kind. Do you know who they're playing?
They are playing Atlanta, who sneakily hasn't given up a ton of rushing yards yet. So I was surprised about that.
That's probably by choice. That's probably because that's because every team looks at their past defense and be like, all right, we'll just go there.
Yeah. So you had to wonder, like, you're watching that game and you got to think, what are they like? All right, they pay Dalvin Cook and now they see Alexander Madison and like, oh, man, do we really need to sink that money in there? It's just an interesting. It's interesting when you get to see the other guy and that, hey, he's can fill in just fine. I think this is an interesting opportunity for him. But that is all when you're in a potential points, right? That's the opposite effect, which is if you have a lot of wide receivers, you're capturing a whole bunch of those guys on your bench.
Rando weeks where they put up 25 points that never would have been in your lineup, but yet it really hurts your potential. That's what I found. The backup running backs are really great for potential points because you wait until they're predictable. Like, I've been running so many of my leagues right now that I have a bunch of running backs and they don't accrue. I mean, Madison last week did. But that was, again, having a big workload on a partial game. That's relatively uncommon. And then, and then you go really lean at wide receiver where you go, if I need to stream somebody, I will literally pick up someone for that week. There'll be 3 to 4 guys that are relatively close in Footballguys projections, start rate, etc., and pick the one that you like the best and roll them. And if it works out, maybe you stick with them. But if you have a guy back from bye week, injury, whatever that made him miss, then you just punt them back to the wire. But you're so lean and mean at wide receiver, so you don't have 8 guys and it's like, oh wow, I got 2 25-pointers on my bench that no one ever could have expected. So that's the thing. I think that you can actually exploit the system in potential points a little bit there. I wanted to ask, because we've got it was breaking news earlier tonight and actually relatively recently, and I want to know how much you think it may be similar to like a Leonard Fournette type situation where we have Le'Veon Bell now released, and this is where some of those unsteady NFL starting running backs around the water cooler. This is sort of the next 7 days or so that you maybe don't feel so great about them compared to 24 hours ago, because we had Devonta Freeman as that big guy out there. He goes to the Giants. Lamar Miller is buried somewhere in Siberia known as Chicago, and will he ever get out? Who knows? But Le'Veon Bell is a legitimate, can walk into some of these depth charts and will be the presumed, and someone that brings him in probably will look at him and bring him in for the services of being their starter. So are there any shaky ones out there? I know there's been a Footballguys, Bat Channel staff discussion in the last hour or so about this, but there's a few offhand I can think of that I think are, you might have a guy on the top 24 spectrum weekly that could be shifting. And now this is kind of like going into the draft where you go, boy, I hope they don't Trey Mason me with drafting someone that, is pretty noticeably better and or would project for a bigger role.
Yeah, the Giants would have been one, but it doesn't seem. Why would they do it? Is right. one question that I would have to ask myself. Just looking down, Arizona's got nothing out of Kenyon Drake. They've shown mid-year that they would be willing to go out and get a running back. So that's, I think, one to think about.
And they haven't even moved to Chase Edmonds. Edmonds has been electric on his small touches so far, but yet they haven't really moved in the direction of, hey, this week we're gonna make Edmonds the 1A. Like, they haven't moved in that direction in house, which would make me kind of wonder if they'd go out of house, but who knows?
Yeah. That whole Kenyon Drake conversation could be a whole show in itself. Houston's probably not in the need for it. Could the Chargers be? I thought that it was
Right.
pretty curious that they didn't use Joshua Kelly to the volume that we thought they would, and it was really a Justin Jackson show. I thought that was pretty eye-opening in terms of that.
That would be a crusher if he goes there and it turns into Bell plus Eckler when Eckler gets back, and these two guys are quasi irrelevant.
Yeah,
at
totally.
least for the year.
Yeah, totally.
What do you think about Miami?
That's the one I was thinking about.
Okay.
I think that
they're
would make
sneaky
some sense
decent
too,
right now, and again, is that an upgrade over Myles Gaskin? I mean, sturdily, I think you have to say yes. So that's a pretty big open one. I thought, what if he does that Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man thing, where if he goes to Chicago and David Montgomery can see what a better version of himself is?
Yeah, and honestly, they're in contention, right? And
right.
they're, I mean, that's not a bad. That's probably not a horrible fit.
Can I ask a serious question?
Yeah.
Kansas City.
I'm glad you did it, because I've said things that are not super laudatory about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and taking flack about that. So I'm glad that you led with that one. Yeah, I mean, he's a better receiver than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? I mean, he brings that.
He can actually do something at the goal line?
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Well, all Edwards-Helaire does is put up 20-point PPR games.
Can I ask you a question with Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Like, if he looked like Le'Veon Bell, wouldn't the narrative on him would be like, oh yeah, interior grinder, but has no passing game work? But because he's short and light, everyone thinks that he can catch. He's a super dynamic pass catching player, which hasn't really been an efficiency of his at any point. It's a curious typecasting type situation with him.
Yeah, I'm trying not to make Clyde Edwards-Helaire comments on a weekly basis, because I just see more and more affirmation of what my thoughts were before. When he went nuts without playing it down, that the assumption was that the team was just going to cater to his every volume, whim, and desire. And we're 4 or 5 weeks in, and it seems like they're almost moving a little bit away. So I do find that curious. And every time I see guys like Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins, etc., DeAndre Swift, I mean, all these guys, and I just imagine what would happen if they were the chosen one at the end of the first round by Kansas City is what I keep picturing. And again, that's not how fantasy works. Rarely do you get Kamara to the Saints. Rarely do you get that perfect blend of, I want this player to go there, because it usually doesn't. And here we are, the running back one of the class, and they go to Kansas City, and it's the guy we wouldn't have chosen. Some other ones. Seattle's pretty interesting. I was just looking at this list that the football guys put together, in terms of, Chris Carson, blend that together. I haven't been impressed with Travis Homer, etc. You mentioned the Chargers, Patriots. I mean, could they just go the complete? I mean, they collect running backs, and they collect by the side of the road left part veterans that have been previously productive. Le'Veon Bell checks those boxes. I mean, I'm sure they at least had a conversation about Leonard Fournette. So again, don't put it past them. So, I mean, there are some. I mean, is this the week that you kick the tires on Le'Veon Bell and send out an offer to at least see?
I mean, what's the
period?
Yeah, I mean, what's that offer? Is it a fourth? Right? Do you send out a fourth and just see what happens?
Well, I would pay a late second, so I guess I'm on the higher end. Not saying you have to pay that. I mean, you might be able to get him for a third and a player. Sight
unseen, you would send a second right now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because I think what the team that takes him is, he's not going to be a 6-touch player. It's kind of like the signing of Adrian Peterson, right? I mean, you don't bring in Adrian Peterson to go stand by Sean Payton. Well, actually, one person did. It didn't last long, though. So that's not the intention, right? Washington didn't bring Adrian Peterson in to do that. The Lions, all of a sudden now he's like I say all of a sudden, he's still a 15-plus touch player, even though they have Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift. I mean, so I think Le'Veon Bell is of the same ilk. You don't bring him in to do a bunch of nothing. And talk about, man, now are we going to see a lot more Frank Gore? To be honest, like watching every play of every game, the Frank Gore carries are the ones that that's when I get a little sip of water sometimes, kind of take an extra long blink because I'm not really gaining anything from those, and I don't think the Jets are either. So
No.
I honestly hope we get some starts out of LaMichael Pirine or so we get to see other data points just to see dynasty wise what we have.
Yeah, I'm hoping for that too. And Frank Gore was like one of the worst in terms of expected points added last year. It was like -21 when he was.
So
in
wait, so
Buffalo,
he
like,
achieved the expected points because that's what we expected. We expected negative, and he produced negative. So isn't that a positive?
he definitely did that.
Is it worse than Alex Smith expected points added this past week?
I
too
didn't
soon?
check on that.
Oh no! Again,
I'm just happy he's back and alive. Honestly,
great
like that
story.
doesn't even
Yeah,
sound
the
like an
fact that he
over.
was
That's not
giving
even
a-
an overstatement.
Yeah, the fact that he was giving a horsey ride to Aaron Donald 3 times or whatever it was. That's not a low hit. The carrying Aaron Donald on your back thing was the thing I feared the most watching. Oh my goodness. Okay. So one of the big storylines. So you mentioned Dak Prescott. What do you think? Is this something that you're willing to, whether you're a contender or a rebuilder, there is a market here? Would you be buying Dak Prescott as a rebuilding team? Would you be selling him and trying to pivot to wherever your line is within quarterbacks or lower plus? Or would you just be holding and saying, I'll figure it out. I've got some backup types. I've maybe even got another starter or two that I'll make this work. We'll see how the season goes, and Dak will be back next year. Or do you say, what if I could get Deshaun Watson? What if I could get Kyler Murray? What if I could be pivoting to other guys that they're playing right now, and right now they're a top 5 play, and they're on a team going nowhere?
Yeah, so I actually put out on Twitter some questions here just about Dak Prescott because I was just curious to see what the thought was. 2021 101 in Superflex or Dak Prescott. 56% of people said that they want the 101, which is
wow,
that's pretty mind numbing. And then it says who do you think will be the 2021 starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys? The options were Dak Prescott, Andy Dalton, or somebody else. 63% of people said Dak Prescott, 10% said Andy Dalton, 27% said somebody else. So I do think that, and we don't know how that breaks down to your the guy that has Dak Prescott, or the guy or gal who has Dak Prescott on his team in your league, right? But I do think that there's enough uncertainty there that you should kick the tires and that you should look for it. If I'm not contending and I'm looking to acquire him, it would be interesting to see. I think you go a couple of ways. You could go down a level, right? And you could, offer someone that's older, in the Aaron Rodgers tier, someone like that, right? You could offer basically reset the clock on years and go that route. Matt Ryan, something like construct a deal like that for Dak Prescott. Or you could go the other way, which is go, there's a spot where I have Russell Wilson, and can I get Dak Prescott plus for Russell Wilson? Right. I think that's an interesting, the other pivot that you could make. It would probably need to be a lot because there is not uncertainty with Russell Wilson really outside of him getting injured. But, there is questions about Dak Prescott's contract status and those things. So there is a little bit of uncertainty there. I think he makes a really interesting person to at least poke around with this week. And again, if you're on the fence and you have quarterback, some middling quarterbacks that you could trade to the guy that has Dak Prescott, and it might strip you of this year, right? That's a pretty high upside.
Might strip you of the chance this year, and you have to kind of assess, well, what were my chances really? So that is something that could definitely sway you in going the other way. You say, well, I picked up Dak, I'm kind of building, and especially if you have anybody, like what if you had Barkley already gone, you were still doing well, but now you lose Dak, or now you're gaining Dak. So those are all. What do you think about, would Josh Allen be in that? Are you warming to him as one of those cornerstone proven profile type quarterbacks, or does he still have a little bit of tier below type to you?
Well, you told me before we started the show, not to spoiler the
No
Tuesday night
spoilers.
game. So I'll just leave it to say that market might not be as in play as it was,
Oh no.
48, 72, 96 hours ago. So,
Okay.
we'll see. I do think that he's proven quite a bit. I'm not sure the market's going to feel great in the next week about Josh Allen. So, and there's always going to be those questions with him, right? If who he really is until he long-term proves it. He's on a pretty positive track for me at this point, though.
And we know how hot and heavy folks get for the young quarterbacks that are doing something, a la, I think we mentioned it back in the offseason, Kyler Murray, QB2 or QB3 in startup drafts, as the most recent example of that. But I would imagine, two hot young quarterbacks. We've got Joe Burrow. We've got Justin Herbert. I mean, you may not have to add much, if anything, to guys like that to get Dak Prescott. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that in this segment, just because that is how it goes with the 21, 22, 23-year-old quarterback doing something above baseline for that age. And all of a sudden it's assumed that they will be the next great one. So just keep that in mind. If you have one of those, this is a chance to pivot to Dak Prescott and potentially really stabilize yourself from the, well, what if they aren't the Oracle type outcomes that we've seen from the last 3 to 5 years with certain players.
You think Kyler Murray, you think Dak Prescott for Dak Prescott plus for Kyler Murray? You think I think the market would do that, right?
That you would have to pay Dak Prescott plus?
Like if you wanted to trade Kyler Murray to the Dak Prescott owner, I think you could get more than Dak Prescott back in return.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think Murray was at least on even keel before the injury in terms of what is the typical league and two random owners think.
Right.
I think that's perfectly in play. And I was going to ask you, if you were pivoting, I mean, from Dak Prescott, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers, I think going the other way, but you could probably get Aaron Rodgers plus with that age difference, or Matthew Stafford plus, maybe plus. I mean, so just these are all areas to explore in terms of getting additional and moving one way or the other by assessing your options. And again, these are the 3 to 4 day zones, or maybe it's 1 to 2 weeks. But the point is, everyone in your league needs to kind of have a take. And maybe the take is, I'm good at quarterback, so leave me alone. But in general, the Dak owner should at least be open to these. And if you're the Dak owner, be open to moving one way or the other.
Right.
You are listening to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. This is episode 24 with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review over at all your podcasting platforms for this show, as well as the Audible channel for Football Guys. And sign up for the Football Guys daily email update delivered from Joe Bryant. It's coming really early at nights. It's a pleasant surprise to read it before bedtimes like Jordan has on a nightly basis. He's your daily guide to all your news, instant analysis, more important than ever in this crazy 2020 season that has no end in sight. Every single week is like, getting on an amusement park ride because of who's playing, who's not playing, what games are suspect, who's in, who's out. And you got to just be up on it every single day. And the daily email update is the way to do that at footballguys.com/free. Another couple players, Jordan, that I think are pretty polarizing, and like Dak Prescott, this is sort of a week to exploit, explore, or just hold pat. DK Metcalf is going to be one that I don't know if you did a poll, that he certainly would be applicable for some sort of poll. But if there was a startup draft going today, he may be, first of all, I think pretty easily a first-round pick. Secondly, he might be the first wide receiver off the board. What are your thoughts on those two things?
Recency bias is a dangerous drug. I think that's one thing. I'll say this. I mean, when you look at his stats, right, and they're good, screaming regression in the yards per and the points per target, right? When you average 2.6 yard PPR points per target, you are
what's average again?
About 1.6, 1.65 in that range.
So he's approaching double-ish.
Yeah.
75%, 80% plus. Yeah.
That's a very dangerous thing. And what will happen is, and again, it is a classic regression stat, right? It is a stat that year over year is it's very fickle year over year. So even great receivers don't maintain a really high one, and usually bad receivers come back towards the league average, right? The classic example is a couple of years ago, DeAndre Hopkins had 151 targets and finished outside the top 24 on about 1.3 points per fantasy target. The next year,
he stayed that way forever, right?
Yeah, the next year he had basically the exact opposite. When you took the two and put them together, averaged them out, it came out to be almost exactly 1.65. And lo and behold, that second year he was the wide receiver one. So, I mean, that's a lot of it. In terms of,
it sounds like Mike Evans when he went 12 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, 12 touchdowns, or I think it was Mike Evans that did that. But yeah, so the two big drivers of that are yards per reception and touchdowns per target per reception, et cetera, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, touchdown rate's just so huge. And so I'll say he's been good, right? But when you say he's going to be wide receiver one in a 5-week sample, when he's doing absolutely unsustainable efficiency, I think that's a dangerous road. And I'll say this too. I mean, I'd be interested in your thought on this, because we each do a handful of startup drafts each year. The more and more I play Dynasty, the more and more I'd rather be late a year, right? I would rather
make him do it twice and then buy in.
Right. Yeah. Because honestly,
just take the discount guy like Mike Evans, where it's like, what? He's going mid-second? Okay.
Right. Or mid-third, wherever he was going this year. You know, I think that with a lot of these situations, just take the
hit the double or triple.
Right. Hit the double, and you don't need to. And people that have him, I'd be really interested to see people that have him. You know, there's this movement on Twitter or whatnot to have him as wide receiver one. I wonder what they're trying to capture, right? Because with my wide receiver one, I'm trying to capture.
I know what they're trying to capture.
They're trying to capture upside. Is that?
Well,
he's
a creative player, and they're trying to capture. I'm gonna have the next 8 to 10 years of like Julio Jones type stuff. That they're someone that is such a impact player NFL wise. He has Russell Wilson, and you say, I'm getting in now, quote unquote, on the ground floor, even though you're paying, obviously, almost you can't pay any higher prices to get in on that. But you're getting in on a 22, 23-year-old player that is already proven and quote unquote locked in and sort of has everything. And now I just have to reap the rewards for the next decade, as the common phrase goes.
Yeah, and that's an unlikely outcome, right? I mean, it's not an impossible outcome, but it's not something that's particularly likely. I mean, and so for me, the way I would evaluate it is the flip side of that. What's the more likely thing to have happen, right? It's Michael Thomas to continue to dominate, or, I mean, at some point with Devontae Adams, we're going to get into a little bit of an age issue, but you know, next 3 years, who would I think is going to be
the guy can run a route though? That kind of translates.
That's true. You know, who's going to be you know, the more dominant at that point? I mean, right. Because I have a hard time with it, because I've had Lockett over Metcalf for a while, and it's funny because we had this on our show sheet for like 3 months over the summer, and we just never discussed
I think you were going to present. Yeah, it was the off-season topic. You were going to present the Lockett side. I was going to play defense and play the Metcalf side, and we were just kind of go into the courtroom and kind of spar that out in terms of a discussion, and we never got there. Yeah, that was funny. I forgot that.
Yeah, it was like the second segment, and we didn't do a second segment for
3 months. And then we get to week 1, we were like, I guess it's all one segment.
Yeah, we got to it. So it's not super common for these guys to go with these super deep hits. I mean, if you look at, you know, if I've what I call density, which is basically studying the depth of hits for once a guy hits, who, by the way, DK Metcalf has not hit yet. I use as a top 24 seasonal finish. He is not on the board yet. So, but once you sort of get past that threshold, it sort of moves you into a different sphere. 43% of second round draft picks are one hit wonders. And then you sort of look out, you get, a good chunk of guys hit in that 2, 3, 4, 5 range, right? I would say the bulk of them between, basically the 2, 3, and 4% guys, that's another, it's another 40% or so, right? So you're looking at about 80+% of guys are going to hit, 1 to 4 times. Then you get a couple of outliers, right? So I think expecting that super, that Julio Jones level, I mean, let's assume he gets on that track this year, right? That's the start of one.
He gets
right?
one. Yeah, he actually gets one under his belt.
Right. And he needs to get one because it's not, I mean,
well, he already has
hard...
more touchdowns than Julio Jones.
That is true. That is certainly true. But yeah, I am. I mean, I've had Lockett over him, and I mean, Lockett gets as many targets, right? He is not.
Lockett had a down game in week 5, Jordan.
Yeah,
you're not playing this game right.
I got to overreact.
Dynasty / DFS.
Yeah, that's true.
That's where we are. Yeah. So the other thing would be just how often is a player on your roster? Like, going back to my roster retention stuff of just so you're buying DK Metcalf, and what's the greatest benefit of DK Metcalf? It would be, as a 22, soon to be 23-year-old, it would be that you're getting basically the whole thing. And we talk about buying a 21-year-old running back. Why? You get the whole thing. You get their whole prime window that insulates them market value wise, higher population of bigger hits, all of those things. And so for Metcalf, the real benefit is not the next 2 or 3 years. It's really the 2 or 3 years after that. The now, because you're seeing, at 27, 28 years old, you can easily still be right in the first round range of a startup draft as a proven lock and load wide receiver. It's when you get beyond that. So what you're buying with DK Metcalf, and I think the interesting part of the marketplace right now is, so you've got the old guard, which are the older wide receivers that have a long string of production that you pretty much can't browbeat them about almost anything except the fact that they're older than other players. So you get those, but what happens in 2 to 3 years, then none of them, I mean, Antonio Brown, I think, as a 29-year-old, maybe Calvin Johnson as a 29-year-old, all-timer tracks that maintained a first-round-ish startup draft valuation, but that's not super common. And so if you say all these guys are being recycled downward from this point forward, who's next? When someone takes a wide receiver in the top 5 to 8 of a startup draft, who are they taking? And I think there's pretty contested competition if you're looking under 25 years old right now between, say, Metcalf, DJ Moore. You've got guys like CeeDee Lamb, probably Justin Jefferson, Judy, Reagor as the rookie types. Terry McLaurin probably not going to get there. He's already on the older side, maybe T. Higgins. But the point is, there's not a ton of guys, and yet there's going to be 1 or 2 that have been anointed, whether deservingly or not, over the next 12 to 18 months, let's say, that is going to go there, whether they deserve it or not, just because of, if you're looking wide receiver, you're looking young, and you don't want to draft a 27, 28-year-old, that's the bucket you're kind of looking at. I forgot Chris Godwin's a little older than that, but just, and Juju is not on that track right now. But the point is, there's not a ton that you can say, this is the conversation that team would be having for that pick.
Yeah. And that's kind of the price you pay after all these misses early in the NFL draft, right? Your Corey Davises. You haven't had the backfill of guys from these earlier classes, and now you're sort of
that are 24, 25. You like the profile, right?
That
you don't have right now. We don't have a big blend of all the age spectrums. You've got some young guys, and that's why, again, I wouldn't be surprised if someone's taken CeeDee Lamb at the 1-2 turn in January. And not saying that that's horrific or great or whatever, but just like that. You're going to get people pushing it up because you're not going to sit there and see, 14 straight running backs and quarterbacks in a super flex draft. Like, that just won't happen. Some people fundamentally would not draft one of those 2 positions, and you get them in that part of the draft, they're going to look elsewhere. And so I just think it's interesting because, like you mentioned, I mean, you're betting on something that with DK Metcalf hasn't happened yet, number one. And number two, if it happens once, the one number that you mentioned, and then you went on to something else that I would just double hit, which is 42% are one hit wonders. Meaning, and not like, oh, you fall off the face of the planet, but you hit as a top 24 once. So let's round a little bit. That's near 50-50. I mean, it's not quite as dicey. I think, if memory serves, it's not quite as dicey as quarterback one-hit wonders. That you really want the double hit. You want to, like you said, let's wait, and you'll pay the same price for a different guy if you wait for the double. So
that's the key, right? That's my favorite part of this whole calculus. It's the Kyler Murray thing. Okay, so we go a couple.
Let's say
years,
you got it right. Yeah. Great job. You paid the same price.
Exactly. He's not going to go up in value, right? Like, what possibly more could Kyler Murray have been worth? Like quarterback 2, he's not getting over Mahomes, right? And so that's the problem that I have with a situation like DK Metcalf is, okay, if you're right, fine, you collect the year, but I feel a lot safer than next year selecting him there. Get him some sample size.
It doesn't get laughable though when we do this every year, and it seems like it's the same guys right now as it would have been 3-4 months ago. But when you say, well, what's the price difference right now between DK Metcalf and Allen Robinson, DK Metcalf and Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf and potentially out of sight, out of mind Devontae Adams? And you just keep going down. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. I mean, that's probably a laughable ad that you would have to make right now to get Metcalf if you were selling Lockett, or so these guys that aren't overly old, and yet you're having to pay. I mean, Kenny Gallaudet. I mean, talk about a guy that's, I haven't heard him discussed. I haven't seen him mentioned on Twitter one time. So he's not but there's all these guys that have done quite a bit. And they're mid-career players, but they're not super exciting. And I just would imagine the plus you would have to get and the plus you could garner selling Metcalf would be pronounced and potentially franchise chasing.
Yeah, and just to close the loop on it, right? If you took DK Metcalf, if you took these 5 games and just sort of randomly dispersed them throughout his 16-game season where he finished as, I don't know, wide receiver 18 something like that, a wide receiver 2, you'd be like, oh, all right, he had some pop-off games, right? The problem is now that they're sequential, right? And again, you talk about that screaming inefficiency, right? For me, that's a pump the brakes type conversation, because you can't expect that to keep going on. You just can't. And so, that's like Russell Wilson. You can't expect, I think he was at 14% touchdown rate, some crazy thing. I mean, that is not going to happen. Right? I'm not going to say anything's impossible because 2020 has occurred, but it's extremely unlikely for that to keep going. And then you're sort of stuck holding the bag of a less efficient player. So, this could dovetail into a conversation, which is probably, you could do a series of weekly shows on, but how much we should care about market value, right? I mean, that is a part of this that forms my strategy, which is I don't much care, right? I think the people that put him at wide receiver 1 are trying to capture this huge high-end upside market value for years and years and years. And I think that can be a really, really dangerous game to play, and can go after paper champions, right? I mean, that's the classic paper champion, is when you have a bunch of those super high value guys and then you actually don't have a productive roster. So I think that's another thing that's going on, and we could sort of have that debate about how much you should weigh that and what you care about.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, I mean, we were getting to the point potentially to start the season. Calvin Ridley could have been in this conversation. He had that one of those horrific down games, and he was sort of on that track. I remember, what were we closing last year? Who was the hot guy? Chris Godwin, right? I mean, he was so in fuego, and now where is he? Yeah, he's dinged up, but Mike Evans churning it out. They had Gronkowski. They're a run team. They have Brady. Like, things change, and all of a sudden Chris Godwin is someone that when he comes back, it's not like you project him to be how he was finishing last year in terms of his status there. So a lot of players like that are, Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, talk about a fall from grace, right? A 21, 22-year-old that is on this unbelievable historical track that basically, I think it was Larry Fitzgerald and maybe one Randy Moss. I mean, the best names ever were on his list, and you can still think he's a really good player. But where do we stand today with him? I mean, a fraction of what he was at that moment of annotation. Is that a word? Annotation? No, it can't be a word. I'm not even saying it right. Jordan's like, what did he just say?
When he was anointed.
when he was therefore anointed. All right, so we don't have really any trades to go over. Because you know what? The week is still going on. This is crazy. The week is not over.
In real
time.
Can
I tell you, I got itchy today that I couldn't really fully do my waiver routine on Tuesday. Because
I bet. Yeah.
And what's with this ambiguous My Fantasy League says, hey, if you had Tuesday waivers, guess what we're going to do? Just, I don't know, it might be 2:30 a.m., 4:20 a.m. Who knows when it's going to be? It'll be sometime overnight at our discretion. That's what they basically said. If it's set for, I think one of our co-owned leagues, we had it for, it was like supposedly 10 o'clock tonight, 11 o'clock tonight. That's not happening. Apparently it'll be in the middle of the night. Jordan will see it happen. Chad will be asleep. But is there anybody you wanted to rapid fire hit on? I also wrote down Chase Claypool if you had any thoughts on him. But I would imagine if you are pointed in that direction for DK Metcalf about being unproven, Chase Claypool must be alarms. We're releasing Dobermans in the yard. I mean, so many things must be going off for you for Chase Claypool.
I mean, 4 touchdowns a game is a totally sustainable pace, right? I mean, that's
especially when you rush him in as a wide receiver.
right.
I suspect goal line back.
I suspect that'll continue.
Like the Kittle, remember there was like a 3-week span where George Kittle had like 2 shovel pass touchdowns, or like one wasn't in around. It's like, wow, this is a new thing.
Yeah. When didn't Kelsey run the read option a couple years ago, and it was So I mean. Good. It's interesting because there's, I think, a lot of different things going on with that wide receiver core. And ultimately, I mean, I'm still a believer on Juju, right? And again, what's interesting at this point of the season is, and Adam Harstead's done work on this in terms of what's more sticky, basically preseason ADP or production, right? And
in the month, opening month,
yeah. And now it's starting to get where, there is some predictiveness in what's happening with players, but there's for that early part of the season, there is a lot of, it's better to just sort of stick, ignore what's going on and just use the preseason ADP because it's more predictive. So now we're sort of getting into that phase where it's a little bit more of transition. I mean, I still think that Juju Smith-Schuster is the best wide receiver on that depth chart. And that's just my thought. I mean, we'll see. I mean, again, at any particular game, you can have a guy that just has a good matchup and he gets peppered, right? Which is, I think, a little bit of what happened with Claypool. We'll see. But before I start making moves for these guys, I think I want to wait a little bit more, because no matter the most meteoric riser, right? No matter who it is, at some point there will be a down game. There will be a couple of down games, and at that point, you can sort of, the market cools a little bit and you can then get in on them, but at least you have more sample size instead of overreacting to a huge game.
Yeah, 4 touchdowns. He had more targets in that game than the previous 3 games of his season combined. And I mean, he was being covered by linebackers in some settings. I mean, so that to me was a fatal flaw of the Eagles defense that happened to, 3 catches was as high before that. I mean, again, that reeks of special game. And like you said, it's not like it's, it's not like AJ Green is on that depth chart and Travis Fulgham and one other guy. And it's like, oh, look at Chase Claypool rising. Like, no, I mean, we're talking about Deontay Johnson. A lot of people like him. Juju Smith-Schuster, James Washington, Eric. I mean, they have a really high quality passing game pecking order. And to say that Claypool is going to rise above, and not just rise above, he has to be the unequivocal wide receiver 1 and get 120 targets? Like, what's the actual number he would need to hit to reasonably predict that he's going to be, wide receiver 20 or better for the rest of the season? I mean, I would imagine it's 120-ish targets, maybe more, even if you're scoring a decent clip of touchdowns. So that's just what I would caution. That, I mean, you can, I would guess today and this week, you could probably easily get a 1st round pick. And I'll just say from the college profile plus the fact that you're projecting a lot from that, that would be a really high quality exit based on the information we know today. Final thoughts, Jordan? Closing up shop?
Yeah, I mean, just keep grinding, right? I mean, this season is going to be a roller coaster. It looks like. I mean, we've got more COVID stuff today. I mean, just keep grinding, and there's going to be a lot of frustration and everything like that. Just don't give up, because there's going to be so much stuff that happens, and we've seen a lot of injuries, and keep grinding the news, hang in there. And I think that you will, if you can sort of have the endurance for the season, you'll be better than your opponents will be in terms of that. It'll give you an edge over the long season that we still have ahead of us.
Yeah, if you're building for tomorrow, next week, or next year, I mean, it seems like it's more of a daily game in terms of the attention paid, who's being dropped. We're really getting into the bye week season of you're going to see more and more, probably to your observation, interesting drops. As we go along with bye weeks and injuries piling up and people chasing situations that are developing right in front of us mid-season, that there's going to be players that you like for the rest of the season, players potentially into next season that you're able to acquire for free or for bidding on the following week, that are all going to be in play of players that you might have wanted to include in trade offers to that owner, to that team. So just keep all that in mind, and that's why you really have to stay on top of it. And it feels different than in previous years. Like things are operating at a faster tempo. Just the revolutions per minute are going there in each one of your leagues. But this week and next week really feels like the week that you're deciding team direction. There's a number of critical players to either be, and it kind of you can explore both sides. I mean, you could be a seller on Dak in one league, a buyer in another, and it all depends on the price. So keep that in mind, that even if you're just making a list of 3 to 5 hot button players that you think are overtly potentially over or undervalued, and go make some offers around your league as a buyer, as a seller, to get a sense of thing. And each league will be different. So these 2 weeks, though, team direction is starting to separate a little bit in your league. Plus player value, like you mentioned, I mean, just the hot start, the cold start, betting on longer term profiles, selling the sizzle players, all those things are tactics to use in your leagues to set yourself up for a good rest of your season. But as we always talk about, I mean, a good dynasty overall outlook, which goes beyond the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I can't believe, I mean, we're basically halfway to a lot of teams' trade deadlines, which is unbelievable, that the sample size is building up, and we're a third of the way essentially through the season. So in this episode, again, we discussed all those tactics. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.